Welcome to another edition of the Undaunted Man Podcast. My name is Mark Johnson. This is my partner, Jeff Lawton. So we're going to talk about discernment today, what it means and what it is, and how to do it effectively. And obviously we can't cover, well, maybe not obviously, but in case you don't know, it's impossible to cover the entire topic of discernment in one discussion. Because there are some kind of universal principles that go along with what discernment is, and how each person experiences it is unique to that person. So we provide the starting point, and then every individual has their own experience of those universal principles.
I actually had a client of mine yesterday. I used the word discernment in the context of being able to differentiate between what we might be thinking and what actually might be the truth, particularly one's spiritual truth. And I was this is not an unintelligent man. He had never heard that word before. He didn't know what it meant. So that leads me to think that it would be useful to start with, why does discernment even matter? And then what is it, and how do you quote unquote hear it, read it, understand it?
Wow, that's fascinating. I know this is a little bit of a rabbit hole. I'm amazed and a little sad that he hadn't even heard the word before. How old is this person?
53.
Wow. Insert commentary on the state of our education here. Discernment is the ability to trying to think of a better word, to divine truth, in the sense of divining rod.
Yeah.
Using a divining rod to see what's really there, rather than just with the limitations of our five physical senses, and with the limitation of our conscious mind and emotions. Just by nature, our five physical senses and our conscious minds and our emotions are limited facilities, highly limited facilities. I used to have a very good friend that we frequently, argue about this, and we'll put things in the context of Mr. Spock and Captain Kirk from the original Star Trek. And I always point out that it took both of them to solve the problem, because Spock's logic was always limited by the information he had available to him. And none of us ever have all of the facts at hand. It's not even possible for us to have all of the facts at hand. And our emotions are heavily influenced, if not created, by our thoughts and understandings of the facts. Thought and understanding of the facts is what generates our emotions. And what our emotions are not a source of truth. They feel true, but the only truth that our emotions point to is the truth of how we feel about what we think. That's
Which, of course, is all that matters.
Of course, that's all that matters. But that's the limitation of emotions, and we frequently get, as humans, we get fooled by our emotions because we're so convinced that it just is such a visceral experience in our body that how can it not be true? How can it not represent some form of objective truth? And so you combine Spock, who was always highly intelligent and had more of the facts than Kirk typically, and had typically flawless logic. And Kirk, he was human and added emotions, which are important, and also intuition, which is our ability to process beyond the thinking mind and beyond the emotional heart. And that's what discernment is. And I mean, what we call discernment, we believe it comes from a spiritual place, which simply means beyond the physical. And I've never met a person that's never experienced intuition. I've never met a person that hasn't known something that objectively they have no reason to know, but they know.
What's interesting is, sharing about my client who didn't know what that word meant. I also get surprised. I agree with you that all of us have had intuitive experiences, but I've been kind of shocked recently at even the number of people that have had it but don't have that name for it. When I say, well, what does your intuition tell me? And they'll say, well, I don't think I have intuition, or I don't know what my intuition is. And that leads me to also to create for the viewers the content. Another piece of the context for discernment is you and I do our best every day to use our intuition as our main inner compass. And discernment for me is akin to, I'm looking at, do I take path A or do I take path B? Or what's a given situation calling forth from me to do, or B? And I go inside. And it's a blend of, do I notice anything in my body? But to a point you made before we started recording, I definitely get that the body is limited and it is part of the egoic structure. So it's so hard to put into words, but when I'm trying to discern what's right action, and I know you do this too, I go up.
Mm-hmm.
I connect. We often use the term that still small voice inside.
Mm-hmm.
We also refer to it as our spirit. We listen into our higher self, our spirit. And if I'm patient, and the older I get, the less time it takes, but if I'm, patient enough and really committed to believing that the answer that I divine from the divine for me, I just have to be still and do my best to have my mind shut the fuck up and just listen. And then when I get a message, and you do this a million times a day as well, I just know it. I feel it, and that's the intuition, the intuitive element of it.
Yeah, I it's now gone quantum physics is now kind of gone mainstream in certain ways. Dr. Joe Dispenza
Hmm.
is one of the ones that's been talking about it a lot, and we're also seeing there's a ton of people out there now that are kind of, I don't want to say riding his coattails, but there's enough science being done at the around quantum physics, and quantum physics is essentially in the business of proving the gurus right. Um,
Right. Yeah.
um, and they're just putting scientific language and mechanics to what the gurus have been talking about for 15,000 years, at least in the yogic tradition, goes back that
Hmm.
far. So what we're really talking about is accessing kind of the quantum field,
Yep.
because I guess the latest stuff is now starting to come out that um, we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience, and that our bodies actually exist inside a field of consciousness rather than consciousness residing inside the body. At least this is what the science is pointing us toward, and that's what the gurus have been talking about for,
Yeah.
like I said, 15,000 years. Um, Point of all that is that when we stop limiting ourselves to um, temporal resources, the conscious mind, um, the emotional heart, um, we get access to much larger fields of information, and the ability to discern well um, rests on our ability to access that higher mind, access that higher consciousness. And this is what every spiritual master, from Jesus to Buddha to pick your yogi, pick your favorite yogi, um, have been pointing at for many, many millennia now.
Yep. Yeah. And why we're talking about it in the context of the undaunted man is in our groups and our coaching with men. This is one of the essential skills we're trying to help them either discover, because I've certainly had men who they know what the word means, but the context of why it matters is missing for several guys. Because to them, discernment it's all ego, it's all thought.
Mm-hmm.
And what my mind says is the only possible truth, which you're pointing out is wholly inaccurate. Um, so I just want to keep anchoring it here for those watching that men, by default, a lot of men, not all men, but a lot of men, myself included, are prone to thinking through something. And it's not that knowledge, to your point a few minutes ago about Spock and Kirk, Spock had the knowledge, he had the data in a way. And, Kirk had intuition, feel, empathy, things like that. So I think it's really useful to be able to point out that thinking about what to do is only part of the equation, and that's why we're having this conversation. You need that other element.
Right, and I think I would probably push back on you a little bit that yes, it's true that we tend to think about things, but modern men, in particular, men, younger than 50, at least in the West, are drowning in their emotions.
Yeah.
I mean, the old stereotype, the old feminist stereotype of men as being stuck in their heads and having no access to their emotions is and always has been a lie.
Yeah.
Always. It's just that we access our emotions differently than women do, and we process our emotions differently than women do. Um, and the narrative for the last 60 years or so is that if you're not processing emotions in the way that women do, then you're doing it wrong, which is
Yeah, and you're unemotional.
right, which is a lie. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It's a lie, and I'm kind of tired of pulling punches on that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no different than telling a woman that she should process her emotions the way men do. That would also be a lie and foolish because you're trying to force people to go against their fundamental natures,
Right.
which is not smart.
So how do you connect to it? And then if I have anything radically different, I'll add it in, and then people can go, "What the fuck?" and figure it out.
Well, the way men, the old stereotype of men going into their caves, that is like with all stereotypes, they're based on a kernel of truth. In this case, the kernel is a giant mountain, because that is the way men process. That's the way. That is the way that. Um, that's the way. That's our natural way of going inside and listening. Our friend Allison Armstrong can talk at length about the differences between men and women and how our hormonal differences beginning, at conception cause our brains to develop differently and we develop different skills and different attributes. She's brilliant at that. But that going into quiet and going into sometimes solitude, and deep listening, and that's harder and harder. It's harder and harder to find those things today. But
Yeah.
essentially, going and finding a place with minimal distractions, ideally no distractions, so that you can engage in deep listening, which means you hear your thoughts and you feel your emotions, but you also listen for what's beyond your thought and emotion, because there is an energetic field of consciousness, and that's scientific. That's not woo-woo crap.
Mhm.
There is an energetic field of consciousness that we can experience, and there is knowledge available and truth available to each individual person there. And everybody will experience that in their own way. Some people have a visual sense of it. Other people have an auditory sense of it. They actually
Mhm.
hear voices, hear words. Personally, for me, it comes as an inner knowing. It's just a knowing what the right next step is. And that doesn't mean that when I go into my cave, I suddenly know the ultimate truth of everything. I just know what the next right step is for me, and
Mhm.
that's it. I mean, it's not. No one knows what the next right step for anyone else is. Although there is an enormous number of people in our industry that believe they do.
Right.
That's a whole nother
Yes.
topic for us
That's a
to
whole another
a whole
podcast.
nother podcast. Um, but it's going into silence. And that doesn't mean you have to be like a monk. It could be, you could go out in the garage and work on your car. You could go mow the lawn,
Go fishing.
go
I have a
fishing.
couple guys in one group that is literally their church.
Hmm.
This time of year, one of the guys, he'll get up at 3 a.m, drive 2 or 3 hours
Hmm.
by himself, which he loves, and he ice fishes. And he's in his little ice fishing thing, just him and his rod.
Hmm.
And that's where he does some of his, deepest listening.
Hmm. Yeah.
You
When I
know,
was younger, I used to do that on a mountain bike. Now I tend to do it more hiking, standing on mountaintops, out in the woods.
yeah, yep,
Um, it's not that you don't have to sit and do nothing. And there's actually a great argument to be made that we don't do enough nothing. Um,
right.
but
I'm right there with you.
sitting by a fire in silence with your friends
Yeah,
was one of those ways. Um, and what's sad is there are so many men out there these days, even men that are our age, that don't have friends to go sit in silence around a fire with.
right.
I mean, I have one of I'm like I have a handful of friends that I can go sit by the fire in silence, sometimes with a cigar, sometimes with a pipe, sometimes
Right.
with a glass of whiskey, and just sit by the fire and look at the flames, look at the stars.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, you could go sit in a monastery. You could do that. That works too. But it's just finding that silent place that is conducive to accessing that higher mind.
And I want to reemphasize something you said a couple minutes ago, which is discernment is about discerning the next best step.
Mm-hmm.
And why I think that's important is because, at least in my head, it's a natural thing to want to know the next moment and what's the three after that I need to know about ahead of time so I can pretend that I know how the entire damn thing is going to go. And you can't possibly know that ever.
Right.
And so that's why it's such a great tool and a muscle, as it were, to strengthen, because the next right step is the only one that you need to know. If you believe, like you and I do, that we're divinely guided, and the more we tune in that quiet, then we get to hear the next best step. And then if we have the determination and courage to trust that and take that next step, then the one after that reveals itself, etc. And, to your point about how much more difficult it is these days to have those friends, those buddies, I'm with you, hanging out around a campfire with other men. Oh, it's the best. And um, and when you read all the stuff that's coming out now about, the challenges that men are facing, particularly with friendship and camaraderie and community, that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the Undaunted Man, not the sole reason, but a valuable vehicle for our purpose of, helping men discover and connect with that voice, reconnect with their authentic, spirit-driven self,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to integrate that with the human aspects that we all have, like emotion and thought. And so we create that virtual, not virtual. Well, yeah, you have a virtual group.
Mm-hmm.
We create that campfire.
Mm-hmm.
but we do it in our groups. So for those who are listening to this thinking, yeah, I don't remember the last time I sat around with a bunch of guys and either talked about the challenging stuff, the deeper stuff that the older you get more hungry for in general than just the superficial crap. All you have to do to find out how you can have an experience of that is to go to the undauntedman.com, and you're going to see all kinds of cool stuff around men's circles, what we have available, what might be in it for you. So we invite you to check that out. In addition, if you haven't liked this channel or subscribed to it, do that. And if you have questions or you're thinking, well, these two guys are full of shit, what do they know? Then put that in the comments. We love that. We're happy to discuss anything about the stuff we're passionate about, and we're always interested in other perspectives. So check us out if you're so moved.
Thanks for watching.